Hi guys, my name is Yash and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I will try and give you a brief introduction to Python 3 with some basic syntax to get you started on your programming journey. Python is one of the most popular programming languages for all developers and programmers, and it is known as a readable programming language because it is fairly easy to learn and simple to code. To even get started on coding, you have to install an IDE or Integrated Development Environment, which is simply a term for a text editor. For this short tutorial, I recommend using replit.com because this is an online text editor which will allow you to experiment with Python quickly without the complicated installation process, which can be quite time consuming if you just want to learn the basic syntax. Personally, I love using Replit because I can use it straight from my browser and this is easy to dive in and code anything I want. So to get started, in your web browser, type in replit.com and create a free account, and then you can open a new Python 3 REPL. So if I click here and click Python, just name it anything, I can call it. We create a REPL. The left hand side is where you'll be writing your program, so you write the Python code itself. And the right side is a console where you can get instant feedback from your code. Right, so the best way to start learning Python is to perform an input and an output. So in Python, we can use the print function to output any text onto the screen. So if I type print, open brackets, and you need quotation marks, I am learning to code, and then close the quotation marks and close the brackets. In most programming languages, including Python, there are specific syntax that you need to use when communicating with the computer. So here, after print, we've got a pair of brackets, and we also use a pair of single quotes wrapped around the text. This indicates that we only want to output the text inside these quotation marks and nothing else. So here we're only going to output this this text here because it's inside the quotation marks. Right, so if we run this piece of code, so you can see there's a big button at the top, run. So you can see here it's printed out in the console, I am learning to code, because that's the text which we put inside these quotation marks. Similarly, we can use an input function to ask a user to input any value, and then we can maybe store it for future use. So I'm going to make a variable called value, but I'll explain what variables are in detail shortly. So value is equal to input, and then open brackets again, and then we can write please enter any number. And then what will happen is when they enter this number, it'll be stored automatically into a variable called value. So if we run this, number 25, and there we go. So it's printed out what's now stored in the variable. Right, so variables are memory locations which store specific information or values in a program. We can name variables in a descriptive way so that later on, we always understand the purpose of certain data. A way to imagine this is that a variable is a container where we can store different items for future use. We can also write a name on the outside of the container so that we know what's being stored inside. So in Python, we can assign a value to a variable by using an equal sign. So if we write my age is equal to 16, we are assigning the value 16 here to the variable my age. Now we can use this variable in various calculations, such as if we do print my age plus 10, this is going to print my age in 10 years time. So that's 26. So next, an important concept in Python is a data type. And I'll just show you the 5 basic data types in Python, but there are a few more in detail. So data can have different types. For example, it can be a number, it can be a text, or just a true or false value. Firstly, we have the first data type, which is an integer. And an integer is just a positive or negative whole number, which means it can't have any fractions, can't have any decimals either. So integers can be -5, 0 is also an integer, 5, and then goes up to infinity. So next we have a float, which is a number with a decimal point. For example, 8.26, 3.0, or even 0.0. Because of that 0.0 or 0.26, we've got a decimal point, and now that's a float. So to test that, if we make an integer, if we make a variable called x, we assign 2 to the value of x. So we've assigned it as a whole number, it's a positive whole number, so that means it should be an integer. To check this, if we do print type of x, and close these brackets, we'll say class int. So here int stands for integer. However, if we now change this 2 to 2.0, even though when we say 2.0, we know it's a number 2, Python now will say this is a float because it's now got a decimal point. So that addition of that 0.0 is very important because it makes it into a float, no longer an integer. Now we also have Boolean data types, which is the data where there are only two values, so a true or a false, or yes or no. So if we say x is equal to false, it will give us a bool. So a bool is just short for Boolean. It's interesting to note that although a Boolean value is not actually a number, it is classified as an integer, where true has a value of 1 and false has a value of 0. The fourth data type is strings. So strings are used for letters, numbers, symbols, or any other text that you can write using your keyboard. So here, when we output this, I am learning to code is a string. Lastly, we have a character, where a character is just a single letter. So if we just had A, for example, now that's just one single character. We will look briefly at operators in Python, which can be used to perform any mathematical calculations, such as addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. So let's make two variables, num1 and num2. And remember, we looked at earlier how to assign a value to these variables. So if we say num1, I'm going to assign the value 5 to it, and num2 we can assign the value 10 to it. So now we can effectively create a basic calculator in Python and perform some basic mathematical calculations. So if we now print num1 plus num2, I think we all know that that's just going to add these two numbers together. So we're expecting 15. There we go, that's 15 there. Now if we change this plus to minus, that's now going to give a negative number because we're taking away 10 from 5, so it will give us a negative number. To divide, we just use a /. But it's interesting to note here that this / division symbol will always give you an answer as a float. So for example, if we change these numbers to 6 and 3, and we're expecting 2, but in fact Python will give the answer as 2.0 because it always gives the answer as a float when you're using this division. And we can also do times, but we use an asterisk here. When we times these, we get 18 because we've multiplied them together. And a couple more useful operators are modulus, floor division, and exponent. So modulus is just a percentage symbol. So what this does is it finds the remainder of any division. So if we change num1 to 10, we can keep num2 as 3. So what it does is we know that 3, the number 3, goes into 10 3 times. But 3 times 3 is 9, so there's a remainder of 1. So that means we should get the answer as 1. However, if we did floor division, we use two / symbols. It gives the whole number value of the division. So if we do a floor division of 10 and 3, we'll get 3 because number 3 goes into 10 3 times. And finally, we use the asterisk symbol. So we use two asterisks for an exponent, which is something to the power of something. So if we had 10 to the power of 3, it would be num1 asterisk num2, and that will give 1,000. Now we're going to look briefly at Python conditional statements, because undoubtedly you'll be using these in all programming languages. An if statement uses logic to work to decide which statement to execute, and therefore to use an if statement, we use the following logical conditions. For example, if we wanted to say if something's equal to another number, we'd say if num1 2 = num2. So if the value of num1 is equal to the value of num2, then we can do something, execute some statement. Now we can also say that if num1 is greater than num2, so that's just checking if one's bigger than the other, less than similarly. And if we wanted to do greater than or equal to, we can just add a equal sign after the greater than symbol. If we wanted less than or equal to, here we go. Finally, another one which you may not be familiar with is not equal to. So if we said if num1 is not equal to num2, then we can execute another statement. The if statement follows the structure. If a certain condition is true, then we can run a specific statement. So here we're saying if this condition that num1 is not equal to num2 is true, then we just use the colon symbol. then we can execute something like print num1 plus num2, for example. Then we can say else. If that certain condition is false, then we can execute something else. So we can say print num1 minus num2. And that means we're using conditions here now. So if this original condition is true, then we execute this. If not, then we execute this. I'll walk you through an example so that you can understand this concept a little bit better. So if we create two variables and we say if Yash age is greater than Scott age, then remember the colon symbol, then we can print Yash is older than Scott. So elif is used in Python to say if the previous condition was not true, so if Yash was not greater than Scott's age, then try this new condition. So we can say elif Yash age is equal to Scott age. And we can also finally do an else. So we can say else if neither of these conditions are true. And we know that if it's not greater than, if it's not equal to, that means it has to be less than. So that means Scott has to be older than Yash. Okay, so now if we run this code, we're expecting the first one to be executed because we know that Yash age is greater than Scott age. Right, so we get Yash is older than Scott. Now let's say we change Yash age to 5 and Scott's 20. Then Scott is older than Yash. However, if they were both 20, then we'll get Yash and Scott have the same age. We will finish off this short introduction to Python by covering for loops and while loops. A for loop is used in Python to iterate or repeat a particular sequence of statements. For example, in Python, we can use the syntax for I in range, for example, you can use any number, so if you say 4, then this says that we'll iterate over a certain statement here 4 times, and then we will stop. But something to be careful of when you're using these for I in range statements is that in programming, by convention, we start counting from 0 rather than 1. So let me show you an example. So if we kept this first line, we said that for I in range 4, now we're saying that we have joined a string and the variable I using a comma. This will go over the print statement 4 times. However, it will start with I is equal to 0 and not 1. So we're expecting that this line here, line 2, will be iterated 4 times. But if we run this, you'll see that we're on number 0. So it starts with 0, 1, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. That's just something to be careful of when you're using the numbers here. And lastly, we're going to look at a while loop. So a while loop executes a set of statements while a certain condition holds true. So in this way, a while loop is known as a preconditional loop because the condition is outlined right at the start of the loop, and only if this condition is true, then the next set of statements will be executed. And if the original condition is false, then the set of statements below will not be executed unless the condition becomes true again. Let me show you an example. So if we say age is equal to 16, we can use a while loop to say while age is less than 18, then so you are too young to drive. But then we can also increment the age variable by 1 so that the while loop will stop running after 2 iterations. So when the age becomes 18, the condition will no longer be true because then age is not less than 18, it's going to be equal to 18 or maybe greater. That means it'll exit the while loop. So if we say age plus equals 1. Right, so you may be wondering what plus equals is. So plus equals is essentially just saying age is equal to age plus 1. So there's a shorthand of doing it just using plus equals. So now if we run this statement, we get your age is 16, so you're too young to drive. Your age is 17, so you're too young to drive. But you'll see that after this, it stops doing the while loop because now age is not less than 18. So I hope that you've learned something new in this basic Python tutorial. Although we have just broken the surface of this vast and versatile programming language, it's definitely a rewarding experience to get coding in Python. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the comments below, and I'll try my best to help you out. Thanks for watching and enjoy coding.